The Florida Podcast Network, the voice of Florida.
From Mallory Square in Key West to the Governor's Mansion in Tallahassee and all points beyond, you're listening to the Florida Beer Podcast, powered by FloridaBeerBlog.com, your source for all things related to the craft beer community in the Sunshine State. And now your host, Dave Butler.
Ladies and gentlemen, we have made it to episode 150 of the Florida Beer Podcast, powered by FloridaBeerBlog.com. On behalf of the entire team here at the Florida Beer Podcast and Florida Podcast Network, this is David, your host and author, saying thank you so much for your support. Thank you to Florida's amazing craft breweries and distilleries and scene and everything else for their support as well. Could not have done it without everybody, and I do appreciate it from the bottom of my heart. Thank you so very much for listening. And to celebrate episode 150, we got a big one. I'm sure that if you are listening to this podcast, you might have heard sometime in the past couple of months, there was kind of a big sale that went on in terms of Funky Buddha going back to its original owners and founders, Ryan and Casey Sentz, after having sold it several years prior to Constellation Brands. There is no way to hide the fact that the craft beer industry is going through some changes right now, and both Constellation and AB InBev selling off significant portions of their craft portfolios. In fact, I think Constellation is completely out of the beer game, if memory serves me right. But this is kind of awesome since Funky Buddha, one of the biggest breweries in the state of Florida, is now going back into the hands of the people that made it what it is today. And so we sat down with Ryan Sentz himself, unbeknownst to me, the day they signed the paperwork officially purchasing Funky Buddha back from Constellation Brands. I had no idea that was what was going on, and I'm kind of honored, actually. So Ryan and I had a great conversation. We touched on the background and the history of Funky Buddha, from its origins as a lounge in Boca to opening up the production facility in Oakland Park. Obviously, we talked about the purchase to Constellation Brands, why they decided to purchase it back and when they decided to purchase it back. And obviously, we want to talk about the future. Just because they are back in control of everything Funky Buddha related doesn't mean that they are going to necessarily stay the course and do what they've been doing. What's going to be new? What's going to be different? What is old and coming back and brought new again, and what might be going by the wayside? There's a lot of information to unpack here, so I'm going to stop talking and I will let you listen to Ryan Sentz, our episode 150 special guest, the brand renew owner, I guess how you would say it. Sure, I don't know, of Funky Buddha Brewing in Oakland Park, Florida. Enjoy. I will start with saying that I can't really say welcome back, because you never truly left Funky Buddha to begin with.
No, we've been here since, despite what everyone thought. Yeah, we never left. So,
well, I guess the question is why? Why did you decide to give ownership to Constellation, but decide to stay with? Because so many other brands, here are the keys. Mm-hmm. Farewell. I'll see you if you come visit me in Mallorca.
Yeah. I think that was a big reason why we sold to Constellation specifically is because the reason why we started the business wasn't to sell the business, number one. So it wasn't like we were doing this and that was our big exit strategy. So I still love what I do. I still love Funky Buddha. And when meeting with Constellation, we knew, and there was other people, that we were talking to, and a lot of people say the right things that, yeah, we want you to stick around. We want you to be a part of it. But we've seen other, at that point, we were one of the last big breweries to sell. So we had a lot of kind of blueprints to follow. Okay, this is what happened to these people. This is what, so yeah, for us, it was like Constellation said, listen, we want you guys, we want to not only take you guys, but we want you to still be a part of it. And that was important to me. So that's why I stuck around.
And I was going to say, it seems, because Funky Buddha's story has, I mean, you've been around for 10 years. You just celebrated your 10th anniversary.
Yeah. 10 years as a production brewery and longer.
As a production, because before that, you had the old lounge, which of course then became Robot Brewing, which unfortunately has shuffled off this mortal coil. And that makes me so sad.
Me too.
Yeah,
me too.
They were good. But my initial question is, because we've spoken before, and I remember that the name Funky Buddha itself, you did not come up with.
No.
You purchased what was the Funky Buddha Lounge.
Kind of.
Okay.
I purchased the R&R T-Bar and the Funky Buddha Lounge. That's what it was called when we purchased it.
That's too much.
Way too much.
Mouthful.
And I think the reason why was the original person who bought a place called the R&R T-Bar, and he didn't want to spend the money to change the sign. So he just added the Funky Buddha Lounge to it. So when we bought it, we were immediately changed it to just Funky Buddha Lounge.
Why didn't you just completely change it altogether? Why did you decide to keep that name? And as you continued growing, decided to not only keep Funky Buddha, but double down on in a lot of ways?
Sure. And and all the people I've ever talked to, no one's actually asked why we didn't, because we did get rid of half of it. Why not start from scratch? I liked it. I liked the name, and it kind of resonated with, I like the Buddhist ideologies. I like the idea of being funky. I don't know if that's what originally even attracted me to the brand and talking to the guy who was selling it. But yeah, that was never even a consideration. It was never like, and I also think there was equity in it, right? So like, people knew Funky Buddha at that point. It had been around probably 3 or 4 years by the time I bought it. So, and probably the same reason, like there was stuff, there was, where there was pens and mugs and things that said Funky Buddha out there. And we opened on a shoestring budget back then, thousands of dollars, and doing everything ourselves. So for us, making it simpler, because R&R T-Bar and the Funky Buddha Lounge was ridiculous, but Funky Buddha Lounge we liked.
Absolutely. And I've always kind of found it interesting, because I have gone back when it was Robot Brewing.
Yeah.
And it seems like there was more money invested in the hookah pipes than in the home brew system that was in the kitchen in the back.
Yeah.
Going from something like that, going from a lounge in Boca to what the production brewery was back when it first opened, back when I remember, and Adrian was given the tours and everything. That was one heck of a jump for you.
That was a massive jump. Yeah, it was a big jump from when we went from just the 700 square foot spot that we started off to the 3,500 square foot spot. That was massive, right, for us to do that. And then also starting to brew, essentially. So yeah, so making it's funny you say that, like, about the hookah stuff versus the brewing. The hookahs, that's what made us money back then. Like, when I started bringing in craft beer, just bringing in, not even brewing it, people could carry. It would take me 6 months to sell a 5-gallon keg of a dark beer. Like, craft beer just was not big down here.
It was not only down here, but you were specifically in Boca.
Yeah.
And now obviously Barrel of Monks hadn't opened.
No.
Obviously Robot clearly hadn't. Yeah. There was no Prosperity. There was no Crazy Uncle Mike's. There was no one. You had Tequesta. You had Fran doing his thing, but that was an hour away.
They were who we patterned our system after. Tequesta. Matt and Fran were, they were huge in getting Funky Buddha started. But there was Bruzies in Boca Raton, which is, the concept of like what we used to have back in the day with hops and stuff like that, where they made it there, but it wasn't actually a production brewery. The beers didn't go anywhere, and 5 or 6 beers. So people liked that. But yeah, it was big all over the country, and it just didn't exist in South Florida, which I found extremely weird, and saw something that I was really, really passionate at, and said, there's an opportunity here. And if nothing else, just to have a business. Not like I didn't open up the lounge thinking we were going to open up a production brewery ever. And yeah, the equipment was cheap, because we literally would go to drive 4 hours to get the stainless drum, on Craigslist for one of the things. And then we traded hookah gift certificates for someone who could come weld the frame, so it was done. We did it so tight back then. But yeah, to go from that, a glorified homebrew system to what we ended up opening with, it was massive.
How did that decision actually get made? Because like you said yourself, the money came from the hookah sales. The beer sales were slow.
Yeah.
How did you go from that thought to, all right, let's go ahead and open?
My brother, mostly, him going, you're an idiot. Because so he, at that time, even brewing 30 gallons at a time, the fact that we were the only guys down here doing it, and we were doing stuff that people hadn't been seeing yet. We were getting invites to do festivals all over the country and all over the world. And, I was going to a festival in South Carolina or Boston, and every big player was there. The Dogfish had Southern Tier, the big guys back to Sierra Nevada, anyone who was anyone. And then there was me. And we had, and I say this like embarrassingly, but but we had the longest line by far, and it wasn't because they had our beer or heard of us. It was because we had weird stuff, right? We had the peanut butter and jelly beer and the apple pie beer and a key lime beer. And we kept having that success at these events, and that we were way too small for. And I was like embarrassed to let people know what I was brewing on, and that I was just not a professional brewer. So that I finally, I took my brother to one of them, Extreme Beer Fest, if you've ever heard of that one, in Boston by Beer Advocate, which was my favorite. It was one I used to go to as just a consumer. And I said, we went the year before, and that's when we had the crazy lines. And I said, it's not going to be like that because I think we were new, but I want you to see this. And it was worse. It was crazier. It was like triple lines, and people at that point, they had known about us and heard from last year. And he came back from that saying, you need to stop brewing 30 gallons and actually, be an adult and let's go and let's go for, investors, and let's open up a real brewery.
Awesome. So. And then you chose a place which was not even in Palm Beach County. It was not in Boca. You decided to come down here to a relatively undeveloped, ready to burgeon section of Broward County. Why did you decide? And mind you, it's not totally far away from where the lounge was,
right?
But still, it's a good distance. Why decide on Oakland Park, Broward County for the production facility? I
tell people all the time that, like, clearly we've managed to be successful in brewing in South Florida, and a lot of it, I do think it's, we work our butts off. I think we make good beer, but a lot of it has been, there's been opportunities, and there's been times where we could have went one way and we just so happened to go the other one, just out of sheer luck. And that ended up being the right choice. And in the case of Oakland Park, we didn't choose really Oakland Park as much as we were looking everywhere from like North Miami to West Palm. And my brother would be texting me at 2:00 in the morning. I found the perfect spot. And then one of those happened to be, he was doing some research and he saw that there was this, it
was an old Sears
distribution center. Yeah. And he's like, the city is really excited about it, and they're going to be really helpful. And this is exactly what we need. They're going to make, we're going to be in a warehouse that they're going to make look like a retail area. So it's, you can't afford to have at that time we were 15,000 square feet. Now we're 105, but you can't have a 15,000 square foot facility and pay retail prices. That's why you find most breweries are in like the kind of tucked away,
exactly.
Parks, industrial parks. Yeah. And he found it, and we went and met the city and met the landlord, and it ended up being like clearly one of the best decisions we made. And we tried to go other places. And for whatever reason, I remember we put an offer in a different place, and that might've been in Fort Lauderdale, and the offer was denied, and we were disappointed. And had we chosen that, and had we gotten that, we would not be in the same place, because we were going to be capped off on our size there. So again, we got lucky. You got lucky in more ways than one, because especially with the municipality, because I've heard so many brewers with so many horror stories about either fighting a municipality that does not want a bar in their city, or literally having no clue what they're talking about and having to legitimately write the book as they went along, and having to handhold and educate the inspectors. This is what you're looking at. Here's what it needs to be. But it sounds like you did not have to worry about that. They got it. They were supportive. They understood. And it's weird on, because of zoning, because you have to be zoned for retail. You have to be zoned for production. So they got it. The city got it. They were working with a committee to help build up the area. They got it. So yeah, we didn't have, I hear those horror stories all the time, and this tax collector doesn't understand this, or we can't get the parking for this, and they don't get we need to do that. and it takes forever, but it's been a very good relationship with Oakland Park.
And I was going to say, actually, let's jump forward to now. And as you decide to repurchase Funky Buddha, it is a very different environment here in Oakland Park, because you look down the road, you've got the tap room from Prison Pals. Black Flamingo is going to be opening. There's even Chainbridge Distillery. It's a different feel. You are no longer the only draw in town.
No.
How do you feel about that? Is that a positive or a negative?
I think it's somewhat mixed. I think at the end of the day, we're happy for it. At the end of the day, I mean, yes, you feel like, okay, we're not the only place, but really we're not the only place. Anyways, when we did open up, we were the only production brewery in South Florida. Yeah. So people were coming from all over. Now you have probably hundreds, I'd like to say, right? So the burden falls on us to make people want to come here. And so if you're just sitting there relying on, oh, well, we're the only place in Oakland Park, well, then kind of shame on you and you don't deserve the business anyways. And the benefit is we can become a place where, hey, let's go to Prison Pals, and we can also walk to Funky Buddha. So we're going to get traffic from them just as they're going to get traffic from us. And our job is to provide a really cool atmosphere and an environment and hope that they want to come here.
Awesome. So you've got the production brewery, and you've got a massive amount of street cred for some of the beers that you had originally described as culinary inspired. You know, things like sweet potato casserole, things like obviously maple bacon coffee porter. How difficult of a sell was it back in the early days?
Oh, it was easy. That was easy because it was so different and unique. And I think so when people are going to be intrigued by a sweet potato casserole beer or a maple bacon coffee porter, and they're going to be excited about it because what they had been exposed to forever was, traditional beers. So you had a lot of the purists that were like, that's gross. But we were able to turn on people that said, I'm not a beer drinker. And my fight was always like, no, you just haven't had a beer that you've liked yet. Right. And some people don't like anything we do and it doesn't matter what it is, if it's a beer, but it was a challenge, but I think to find those things, but that was, I think, an easier path for us than just saying, try our IPA.
But then obviously you come back to now and it's sort of become a pastiche of itself in a lot of ways, and that there's a lot of breweries, especially here in the state of Florida, where they will brew one style. They have one recipe, and then how many different ice cream flavors can we throw inside of it? Yeah. And that's, those are the beers. That's how everything is sort of done. Do you feel that style of beer has sort of run its course and now it's time to start looking at something else? Or how do you try to keep a culinary focus still fresh and exciting in a craft beer world where if you haven't used 100 pounds of Jolly Ranchers in your blonde ale, you can just go home?
Right. It's certainly less of a novelty now that everyone does it, right? So, again, there was a handful of people that are doing culinary inspired things like Dogfish Head and Shorts Brewing, and so, like, again, I mentioned Southern Tier. But yeah, I think that the challenge just becomes we've not really run out of things because there's always new ideas. But I mean, we find influence in cocktails. We find influence in any kind of food, right? So it's almost like saying, are you going to run out of recipes at a restaurant? I mean, that's kind of hard. There's always new twists. And I think that's fun. I think that's challenging. But but yes, we have to continue to stay on top of things and not necessarily just do things for trend's sake, but you have to pay attention. And if hazy IPAs are make the best hazy IPA you can, if you think that's a good style, and you can, so.
I will say the one trend that Funky Buddha does not seem to have jumped on is the smoothie sour trend.
It's funny that you mentioned that.
Oh no. What did I just do?
Are you anti-smoothie sour?
I'm not anti-smoothie sour as long as I know what I'm getting myself into. Okay. If I want a Kolsch, for example, I want a Kolsch. Yeah. But if I'm looking for a smoothie sour, I'm guessing Funky Buddha might be the place to go pretty soon.
I won't drink it. And a lot, I mean, 90% of the beers that we make, that aren't for me, and I've made beers since 2009, 2010 when we first started that we continue to make that I think are terrible, but other people like it. So it's just like, it's a taste. As far as the smoothie sours, it's funny that our marketing person just walked by because she's been begging me to do that. And we are going to have, like a smoothie sour day when we release a beer, and we'll have, 5-6 different varieties. I am not as in touch with a lot of our people as to what's going on. And again, I won't as long as people like it, I'll make it. I'll try it. I'll just try to do the best version of it. I used to be very much like, I won't drink it. I don't like it, so I'm not going to make it. I don't think like that anymore.
Okay, so I keep jumping back and forth, and I apologize.
That's okay.
The one question, the initial question that I had about the Constellation purchase is, how does that conversation get started? I seriously doubt that somebody came from Constellation with a proverbial suitcase full of bills and said, "Give me your brewery."
That's exactly how it went down. Yeah, it was like just a big. There's 3 suitcases actually.
Oh,
it's singles.
Nice.
How it started with Constellation, so we, as I said, we never had the intention of selling. We didn't open up to sell. And I think probably, so we opened up the production brewery in 2013. Probably 3 years in is when we started getting people knocking on our doors, and then starting to entertain the idea of like, okay, how can, and it started off as, what if we just sold a percentage? What if we sold 25%? What if we sold, with the opportunity for them to buy more? And you start talking to private equity, and you talk to just guys looking to get into the industry. We talked to some of the major breweries, and then we had one of the private equity groups that we were talking to. They weren't private equity. They were just a couple guys looking to get into the industry. Things didn't necessarily work out with them, but one of their plans was for it to eventually, because they had a very good relationship with Constellation, was for us to maybe do something with them at a later date. So they made the introduction, and we got on with the guys that we met. They believed in what we were doing. They had just a year or two earlier purchased Ballast Point Brewing.
Well, Ballast Point, that one sent shockwaves, not just because of who they were, but how much it sold for.
Yeah.
So was there a part of you that was hoping that you would get Ballast Point money when you sold Funky Buddha?
No. I mean, there was, well, yeah, I would love that, of course. But I mean, they were significantly bigger. They had gone throughout the whole U.S. Sculpin was on fire. And, that kind of marked the end of an era of like where breweries were able to be national, and say like, I think you're going to be hard pressed to see another brewery come out and be able to put out their IPA all over the country. I just don't think people want it. I think they want the local, maybe regional, right? Maybe there'll be as much as what we used to see. So no, yeah. While we would have loved that, that's not how it went down. And so they had an interest in getting more into craft. They wanted us to then, their idea then was, okay, we'll pick up a bunch. It'll be kind of spearheaded by this national presence that Ballast Point already has. And we'll start plugging in the Funky Buddhas, the Four Corners, and other breweries. And yeah, conversations happened, and we ended up liking what they were saying, and we chose to do it. Interesting.
In speaking with the founder of Blue Point, when they were purchased by AB InBev, it sort of opened up supply lines and opportunities and things that they had not really had before.
Yep.
With Constellation, obviously, they've got the beer side of their sales, but they also have a lot of different beverages, including Kim Crawford, which is one of my favorite Sauvignon Blancs.
Yeah, it's great.
When everything was sort of signed, were there new opportunities and new avenues that you immediately had open to you that you had never thought of using before?
I mean, the avenues and the opportunities where they had very good national presence, obviously, and they were talking to the people that was very hard for us to make the introduction to, right? So they were, because they're Corona and Modelo, they're talking to all the major accounts, and they have great relationships with Publix. And while we had that, they had more of a presence, and they had selling a lot of beer. And then through the other stuff, it was, whether it be leveraging their relationship or their ownership of High West and getting to use their barrels, or Dreaming Tree barrels for different things, that certainly was helpful.
Were they the ones that started the conversation about the seltzers? Because obviously you came in on the seltzer craze. Still some of my favorite seltzers that got released during all of that.
Thank you.
And I also did notice that the seltzers were not produced here in Florida. I would assume that would have been another Constellation facility that made those for you.
It was done in Virginia because the intent was we developed them here. We came up with the recipes, and then we were only able to we only had a bottling line at the time. We have canning lines coming to us shortly. So yeah, we wanted to do slim cans. It was a better format. I don't even know if there's any seltzers out there in bottles, but cans are what everyone's moving to now anyways. We see less and less bottles go out and more cans. So that was the reason. They had a canning line from Ballast Point, a huge canning line, and just they could do larger batches.
It's interesting that you mentioned the bottles and cans, because I remember coming here when the bottling line was first opened and us having the conversation that bottles had a different meaning in the marketplace than cans did.
For sure.
Has that finally changed, or is it more just here's what's selling more?
No, it's changed. I mean, and that was an intentional thing with us because we were, again, the first production brewery down here, because craft beer wasn't really a big thing in South Florida. There was a bias from the consumer that was, I don't want to say the uneducated, but the uneducated, like they weren't in the craft space, that kind of looked at bottles as the more like superior look, right? And you wouldn't go to a nice restaurant and see the waiter come over and crack open a can. So while we knew it, the can is a much superior vessel, in my opinion, as far as environmentally, costs, shipping. I mean, there's a lot of reasons. Just beer preservation, not getting light. I think dissolved oxygen, because the canning lines are so much better now than they used to be. But
I remember seeing a Caldera in Oregon. Their website had a huge piece of it devoted to, we're only using cans. Here's why. Please don't poo-poo us just because you see that. And mind you, that was over a decade ago.
Yeah, exactly.
And now you come in and it's everybody.
And that was there, which they did know more about beer, and you could, but here where people were just getting into it, and that what they're used to drinking the imports, and there's still a large contingent of the communities that still like to see the bottle. They think it's better, but that was intentional. I liked cans better. We knew at some point we were going to either switch over or bring the other one in, but at that time, we could only pick one. It was a battle we didn't want to have. It was hard enough explaining Funky Buddha and the weird stuff that we did. We didn't want to also give them the challenge of saying, also cans are not crappy. So
another thing that I've noticed, especially with things like Maple Bacon Coffee Porter, is the bomber is slowly dying, if not completely dead. And I know that, for example, your 10th anniversary beer, that's a bomber.
Yeah.
But very few of the beers that are coming out, Nib Smuggler, for example. I remember the bomber releases basically where we're sitting right now.
Yeah.
And now that's a 4-pack.
Yeah.
Maple Bacon is a 4-pack. What do you think led to the demise of the bomber industry-wide, and then specifically for Funky Buddha?
So when I first got into the industry, even before we were making beer and we were buying, the bombers were always like usually for big beers, like big high ABV, something that was going to be a splittable beer. You can charge more for them. I mean, they were generally like $8-9 a piece. If it was barrel aged, you're getting $15, $20, $25. I just think that the smaller is better for the consumer, right? So you didn't want to have to. I remember many times cracking open like a 750 of like Dark Lord or something like that, or the brewery, what was their Black Tuesday, and being like, and having to drink it myself because it's just too much, But to have a 12 ounce, it's and to be able to buy multiples, we'll still do it. I like the presentation of a big bottle, especially if it's something that is a beer that should be split. It's a 14% beer or something like that. But they've gone away. So
it's funny you mentioned that, because I've noticed, because of the bomber, 22-ounce bottle. I've even seen some where they'll take it and they'll split it up into a 3-pack of 8-ounce stubby cans.
Oh, cool.
And I thought that was brilliant.
Yeah.
It's like that, because it's exactly that. It's one serving.
Yeah.
But in, there's no way to re-cork. There's no way to re-stop a bomber, and because the oxygen's in there already.
I personally love that idea, because there's beers that we make here that I love. 8 ounces is perfect. It's not a knock. It's not a knock on the beer. I also don't want a 12-ounce bourbon. I want or a cocktail. At some point you get a little fatigue on the flavors and the amount of alcohol, and I like variety too. So I'd rather drink multiple different things than have 22 ounces of an imperial stout.
So obviously Ballast Point sells to, still not totally sure who they are. Kings and Convicts. Okay, great. And we are in the middle of, I guess, a reabsorption to the original founders of so many breweries that are across the country. Yeah. When it comes to Funky Buddha, when did the decision to, hey, maybe we need to buy this back happen? Was that pre or post the news about Ballast Point's sale? Conversations started
becoming, I wouldn't say real, where they were super serious and there was numbers being thrown around, but at that time, just because I wouldn't say the writing was on the wall, but the industry as a whole did change. So I don't think you're going to see a lot of, the Heinekens and the Constellations and the Budweisers, AB buying breweries anymore, because it doesn't make sense for them to have the best brewery in Florida or the best brewery in Maryland, right? It's not big enough. And I don't think they want to sit there and it's almost like running 50 different retail locations. So the idea of having these that you can make national makes it less appealing to someone who is doing $20 billion in sales. Yeah. So I think that's why you're seeing it go back, because it's still worth it for Casey and Ryan. It's just not as worth it for them to put in the effort when the ceiling for them is not high enough. Super high for us, but again, that's Casey and Ryan. So.
And then do you also think that you kind of mentioned it a little bit before previously, do you think that the market is starting to change? Because I remember Ballast Point used to be here in Florida. I can't find them anymore. Yeah. Let's see. I'm trying to think. They were in Phoenix, the ones who made Sex Panther.
Someone else makes a Sex Panther?
Oh, and maybe
I think you're right. I think there is another Sex Panther.
Yes,
now that I think
they're
about
in
it.
Phoenix. I can see them. Santan.
Oh, yes. Yeah.
Santan was all over the place. Yeah. Can't find them anymore. Right. 21st Amendment was all over the place. Can't find them anymore. Right. It seems the market isn't so much shrinking as it is concentrating.
Yeah.
Why do you think that is over and above? Is it just consumer taste, or are there other factors at play as well?
I mean, I think the biggest one is, since we started, we probably have had 5 times the amount of breweries open up, 5 to 6 times than when we started, right? Mm-hmm. You haven't had 5 to 6 times the amount of beer drinkers. In fact, you'd probably argue that maybe there's less, because I think people are doing more RTDs, the high noons, people are willing to, they're changing. The seltzers took away, there's a generation of people that just drink seltzers. So I think, again, if you are somewhere in Miami and there's 5 local Miami breweries and you can have an option of getting them at your store, why are you buying 21st Amendment? I mean, you have to be a diehard fan. And then, so they would still love to send their beer over here, but if it's just going to sit on the shelf. I had a friend the other day that I met her, I happened to bump into her at Total Wine, and she picked up she loves this beer, and she goes, "Is this bad?" And she showed it to me, and it was made in maybe August of last year. And I said, yeah, it's probably, not going to be great. It's not ideal, but that's what happens when there's so many selections and, you don't have the turnover. So people start going we did as well. If you don't really concentrate on that area, it doesn't make sense for us to send beer to New York right now. Just let's concentrate on really doing well in Florida.
That makes absolutely perfect sense. In terms of learning, are there things that you picked up from Constellation that you and your brother I didn't realize that we could do things like that you will continue to keep on even now that they're gone?
I'm sure from a marketing perspective, there's things which I don't get too heavily involved in. They were very hands off for me on production, other than giving us what we needed to, we have a very manual way of graining out. Now it's automatic, so they were great in that way. But as far as learning, and not really, other than some of the things that we weren't able to do when we realized why we weren't succeeding like we wanted to succeed. And, we kind of learned from some of the failures that we had, which was no one's fault, but you just start seeing when we weren't a number one priority for the salespeople, which we shouldn't have been. They had Modelo and Corona and all that. You suffer. And now the people that are selling Funky Buddha only care about Funky Buddha. So I think that's going to make a big difference.
Awesome. And obviously, so you're back into owning Funky Buddha, but I would definitely argue that the craft beer market here in South Florida, even in Broward County specifically, is very different because of how many options there are around. There's significantly more breweries that have opened up now that since you had sold. In fact, some of them I know used to be Funky Buddha staff and brewers and whatnot that have gone on to open their own businesses. Yeah. Was that something that gave you and Casey a little bit of pause when getting back into it? Or did you did that sort of excite you? Let's jump into a much bigger pool with a lot more fish that we can play with.
So I know I just made the argument that we didn't have 5 times the amount of craft beer drinkers, but I think in Florida, the amount of people that have been exposed to craft beer, not through Funky Buddha, but through invasive species or prison pals you mentioned, or, MIA, Wynwood, those are people that are going to now potentially drink Funky Buddha. Whereas before, if they never had any craft beer, so that pool has gotten bigger. It didn't do either one, like excite us or like deter us from wanting to take it back. We just knew that you temper your expectations. You say, this is what we're going to do. And the business that we're going to get better, and we're excited about what we're going to do in the future. Not just coming back in and running the business, but distilling, putting things into the tap room that, really redoing everything.
Yeah. I want to come back to the distilling in a little bit, but in terms of changes that were made, are you excited? Are there things that are like coming back? This hadn't been done in a long time. Mm-hmm. Let's go ahead and bring this back in. Like OP Porter not being on the tap list has always been a hole in my soul.
Yeah.
Are there any things like, okay, let's go back to the old ways when it comes to this and this?
I'd like to. I mean, I won't blame anyone for not having. It's funny. I haven't had OP Porter in probably a year, and I just had it the other day, and I was like, I remember why I love this beer so much. It was so good. It's tough when over the years, we've done hundreds and hundreds of recipes, and we have 25 lines. So it's like every beer that you take off, someone's mad about, but you're bringing on something like, that people are like, oh, I'm so glad you brought this back. So we have a bigger rotation. So, but as far as coming up, we are excited when we're going to have a small canning line here and a large canning line that we're going to be able to do several releases a month, things that we just weren't able to do before. We weren't able to do like hey, we're going to do this, a new hazy IPA every month. We're going to do a new sour beer every month. That's what we're excited for.
And one of the things that you also mentioned about, and I've noticed that is becoming a massive, massive new field in the craft beer industry, are spirits. Mm-hmm. So I know, Ology is doing it. Three Daughters is doing it. Big Storm is killing it when it comes to craft spirits. Yeah. You've got Gulfstream here. I know there are other breweries in the state I'm not allowed to talk about, but they are looking at going into the craft spirit realm. I guess to start with, why are so many craft breweries interested in going into spirits? Because I figure it's a very different beast in terms of product and marketing and so on.
Very different, but also there are a lot of similarities. And making spirit starts with making a beer. It's fermenting something and then distilling it. So you already have, and for breweries that might already have salespeople, you're going to leverage those salespeople. For breweries that have a lab, they're going to be able to use that lab. The brewers are going to be able to transition into distillers. And I think you have to. I think people are, if you have the funds and you have the mental bandwidth to do it, it's a smart pivot. It's like if people are going to drink less beer, there's more beer competition. What else can you do to bring in business? And that's something that also I think that most the beer drinkers, they're also cocktail drinkers. So you kind of follow your passion and say, I like it, so I want to do it.
What got you into doing craft spirits specifically?
What got me into brewing was I liked in this industry is because I liked craft beer and I used to travel for it. And what makes me want to distill is I love a good cocktail. I love just a good neat spirit, whether it be a funky rum or a bourbon or a gin. Like I really love them all. And I'm excited because, and we'll fully announce it, but we have a different take on how we're going to do our spirits that I think is going to, it's going to be really cool. It's going to be cool.
Awesome. Now, you said that obviously making spirits is very similar to making beer. They're very similar processes in a lot of ways. Yeah. The government probably disagrees on a number of things. And so there are certain factors that you have to take into account. Have you started to look at space either having to portion off part of the production facility or maybe getting another facility that is just for spirits? How far has that process taken you?
Exploratory. I mean, further than exploratory, it's something that we've been looking at even under Constellation. I was asking them, hey, this is something I think would be good for the business. I didn't even own it. I just said this would be smart. And as far as space, we're lucky. We have more space than, we purposely kept taking space saying better to have it and not use it than to need it and not have the availability. So we have plenty of space. We know where we put the stuff. I mean, it's happening sooner than later. It's not a hope. It's definitely happening. So yeah, we're there.
Do you know what you are interested in distilling yet?
Well, I mean, just to be a functional business, we're going to have to do all clear stuff to begin with, right? We do the vodkas, gins, rums.
I was just about to say that because obviously so many breweries that get into this will take a beer and they will convert it into a whiskey. But if you're making a whiskey or a bourbon, see you in 5 years.
Exactly.
And there's nothing. So
we'll do that right away.
Yeah.
But we're going to need to be able to have some sort of revenue stream to operate it. And I have some really exciting ideas on takes on rum and gin that I think will do very well, or hope to do very well. And if it tastes as good in my mind as it, then I think we'll do okay.
That's funny. Another question that I had for you, seeing other breweries in the state of Florida, and I mentioned Three Daughters and I mentioned Big Storm, Fran Andrulovich with Tequesta / Twisted Trunk / Steam Horse does this a little bit, is in terms of growth, it wasn't so much market growth into different stores, but opening up satellite locations, whether they be tap houses around the area or spread out. Ology is a place like that. I'm trying to think. Big Top does that as well. Do you see that being the next thing for Funky Buddha, either opening up a Funky Buddha branded restaurant or brew pub, kind of like Bruzy was?
Yeah.
Do you see that as being a growth?
It could. We definitely early on we looked at that. I mean, that is your big revenue maker is retail. By the time it goes to wholesale, you have to have such high volume in order to really, I mean, if you're not doing 10, 15, 20,000 barrels, you're losing money. I mean, even that, it's very difficult. So Fran is a perfect example. He had a great concept and he was able to replicate it and put it in different areas, and they're all doing very well. It takes a lot of work. It's different than just saying we're going to double our production. When you're talking about managing multiple staffs and so I won't say no. We did look at it, but it's not. Our immediate plans right now are like make this place awesome, like really put our heart and soul back into here, and also with distilling and new products coming down the road.
Awesome. And so you recently had your 10th anniversary for the production space.
Yep.
In the 10 years since you opened this location, obviously it looked very different for the most part. The main tasting room, it's relatively untouched, but pretty much everything else around it, especially the private event space where we're sitting, is very, very different. Did you anticipate being here 10 years later and seeing what it is?
Wow, good question. No, I hoped that in 10 years it would be our growth would be, the barrels would continue to go up. We would be recognized as a big brewery in Florida, and that's kind of followed a plan. But the other stuff is we this banquet space that we're sitting in and doing, we did 60 weddings last year. Those are all things that I never would have anticipated that have become definitely successful parts of our business. And it was about bringing on the right people and really smart people. A guy that we have that does our banquets, super smart guy that came from Signature Grand. If you know that place, it's like a wedding factory.
Yeah, right? Basically it's right on 595. If you've never seen it, it's a warehouse for events, and that's all they do. And
that's what he did. So we wouldn't have been successful had he not come on. And Casey and I didn't know anything about food. So when we opened here, we didn't open with a kitchen. We opened with food trucks because we're like, all right, it's going to be hard enough running a production brewery in a bar at this size. So we found a guy, and Chef Jeff Vincent that knew what he was doing and was really good, and he was able to do it. So all those things we kind of have an idea, but we also know our limits and say, listen, if it's going to be done, it's not, we can't just think that we're going to be able to do it. We have to find a good team.
Nice. And speaking of the team, I will end with this question. When it comes to the staff, production, tap room, marketing, and so on, now that ownership is squarely placed with you and Casey, has there been sort of a relaxation coming from them, that they're not being watched by the big boys elsewhere, that it's just home, everybody who we need to report to and worry about, everybody's right here?
I don't know if I would use the word relaxing. It's definitely nice that the decisions that we want to make, we can make, and things that could be done. And even they were not cracking whips, it just, by nature of being a big business, these things took a long time you brought up the seltzer. We had the seltzer out or prepared and ready for a year before it finally hit the shelves because it just takes longer. It goes through 9 portfolio councils and 7 different approving committees and taste panels. And we're like, no, this is good. People like it. People in the company like it. So that's exciting and that's good for us to do. And then, but it's, but you also know that everything you do, there's no blame. All fingers point back at you, right? And we can't go like, damn it, Constellation. It's like, no, damn it, Ryan. So it's excitement mixed with OS. I don't know if I'm allowed to curse on here, but this is going to be tough, but it's what we signed up for. So, and we think it's going to be good.
Nice. Well, the buck stops with you yet again. So thank you so much for coming on. I appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you.
And there we go. We have spoken to Ryan. We are back with Funky Buddha. I was able to enjoy some of that 10th anniversary beer that they released, which is kind of wild. If you saw the bottle on social media, it was dipped in white wax, which I'm pretty sure had some sort of aroma agent to it because it did smell like birthday cake, and he even had a real candle on the top. It was kind of funny for anybody else, and yet right down the line with who Funky Buddha was, who they are, and who they will continue to be. Next week, we have kind of another grab bag episode at a beer festival, but we're going to be talking about homebrewing for a lot of it. Because obviously almost everybody, Ryan himself, started as a home brewer and grew from there. So let's actually have a chat about home brewing in 2023 and beyond. The best thing for you to do right now is to make sure to follow us on social media. We are on Instagram, X, and Threads as at Florida Beer Blog. Facebook, we're at FL Beer Blog. Still not totally sure as to why. We're on the internet at floridabeerblog.com and floridabeerpodcast.com. And you can always drop us a line at floridabeerblog@gmail.com. We are a proud member of the Florida Podcast Network, and you can find all sorts of awesome information on the Podcast Network shows at floridapodcastnetwork.com as well. If you are listening to us on a podcasting app such as Apple Music or Spotify, please make sure to follow us. Give us a nice 5-star review if you can. It helps us get the word out to everyone else. This is David Butler, your host and author, and we will see you next week for an awesome deep dive into home brewing. Thank you so much for listening. We will talk to you soon, and drink Florida Craft.